Welcome back. It's Power Rankings time. So, with a bunny right there on the tree, so he's sleeping right there. Well, she's sleeping right there, and you got Shadow, and you got Bear. So, you got a rabbit and two cats on the cat tree. Becoming a rabbit tree. Anyways, so 1 through 32 this week. Not as much movement as one might expect, considering most teams are back to playing, and we're going to get into a more normal schedule from here. But again, now we're around the halfway mark of the season where some teams are kind of just entrenched in where they are. You may have teams that are in different tiers, and that's just kind of how that works. So there's still room for bottom teams to move up from week to week and top teams to move down. But in general, the rankings this week, the biggest movers, there's a couple that dropped by 3. There's a few that dropped by 3. And the highest risers was 2. So there's some teams that moved up 2 spots. There's no really dramatic shifts this week based on this week's results. Number 32, though, a bit of a change at the bottom. It's not Montreal anymore. It's Philadelphia. An 11-game winless streak will do that. That 6-3 loss against Buffalo today really cinched it. The Philadelphia Flyers, in my eyes, are probably playing the worst hockey in the NHL right now. And I don't know how to fix that. I've seen Free Claude Giroux as a hashtag a couple times today, and I get it. I don't know that Giroux necessarily waves, but we'll see what happens with Philly, because it definitely looks like this year is an absolute nightmare. Number 31, same spot as last week, Seattle. An up and down week for Seattle. Yes, they won their first game in a shootout, and then they got bombed 5-0 by the St. Louis Blues. So for Seattle, we're not seeing the prolonged winning streaks or anything like that, of course. So they had the 2 wins, one via shootout. And so I just left them where they are because there was a team that passed them this week. The team that passed them, moving up 2 spots from last week, it's Montreal. Montreal had a decent week. So they go out on the road, and the road has been a nightmare for them this year. Honestly, decent road trip. And considering how long it's been since they've played at home, I think it's more impressive that they went in, they get a point in Colorado, they won in Dallas, they get a point in Vegas. I think these are impressive results. These are teams that are either in a playoff spot or, competitive. And Montreal proved that they're pretty good at playing spoiler right now, and they're starting to get healthier too. So, kudos to both Montembeault and Primo for really seizing these opportunities when presented to them, with Allen out for the next 2 months and no word on when Carey Price is coming back. So, yeah, Montreal salvaged a decent week considering everything else that's going on. Number 29, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Buffalo. So the Buffalo Sabres move up a single spot. And again, it's not that they had a great week. It's that Philadelphia had a really bad week, and Buffalo beat Philadelphia, and so Buffalo moves up. And again, they probably should have beaten Dallas as well. If I'm being completely honest, as a Dallas fan, they probably should have won that game, but their penalty kill really let them down. So for Buffalo, 29, they had a nice thank you, Rick, for Rick Jenneret, whose career is done as of this year. And there's some really nice videos they're putting together. They had Brad May today on the Buffalo broadcast, so it's just kind of nice, considering how rough a season it's been. So it's nice to have at least that, right? Number 28, down 2 spots from where they were last week, is Ottawa. So competitive, yes. Capable of comebacks, sure. Are they winning? No. So for Ottawa, they drop a couple of spots. They get passed is the kind of what happens here. And for Ottawa, we'll see whether or not they can move out of the bottom row. The talent's there. And Matt Murray seems to have bounced back from what was a nightmare start to the season. So there's some reason to be positive if you're a fan of the Sens right now. And so, yeah, we'll see just how far that goes. Number 27, moving up 1 spot from last week. And by now, fans of this team are like, I think he forgot us. No, Arizona. Arizona, 27. I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say that's the highest they've been all year. For Arizona, competitive, it melted down against the Rangers. But I think that was more of once Arizona got that 3rd goal, it woke the Rangers up. And the Rangers realized, we can't lose this game against Arizona the night after we lost against Carolina. So I think for Arizona, they're proving that they can be a tough team to play against. They can play the spoiler role. Yep, they lost against the Islanders. Yep, they lost against the Rangers, but they end up moving up 1 spot. And so we'll see how things go for them next week. Yep, they moved up to one spot because... all right, because they passed the Ottawa Senators. All right, I was just going over that in my head and going, wait a second. Number 26, also moving up one spot, the New Jersey Devils. So the New Jersey Devils beat Carolina tonight. There are some qualifiers with that. It is Jack LaFontaine. It's understandable that Carolina would be kind of emotionally spent after that game last night. But that can kind of come across as an excuse because it's an excuse. And excuses are there for a reason, but still, New Jersey won that game tonight. They proved that if you take them lightly, they'll take you down. And we'll see how things go for New Jersey from here. Again, with the 8 teams above the playoff line in the East and the 8 teams below the playoff line in the East, there's this separation that just keeps getting wider. So these teams are playing for pride that are outside the playoffs right now in the East. Number 25, moving down one spot from last week, the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, if they had won that game tonight against Minnesota, if they'd held on to that lead, odds are they probably stay 24th, but they lost that lead, and then there was the loss last night as well against Minnesota. So the Wild get 4 points out of that setup, and for Chicago, they get the 1. They need to start racking up wins, and I don't see it happening. So the good news, Lankinen had a really good game tonight. The bad news, Fleury's numbers weren't great last night. So for Chicago, they're back in the bottom row. I don't think they end up back down here, and they've been here this year. I don't think they end up back down here, but I don't think they win enough to move up very far either. Moving on to the next row, dropping one spot from where they were last week, is Columbus. Columbus has been stuck at 23rd for a long time, and I thought that was a good spot for them. But then a team passed them this week, so they dropped to 24. For Columbus, it's just the season's been done for a bit now. They're not able to get above 500. They get to 500 and then drop a game, get to 500, drop a game. It's a pattern that I'm sure Columbus fans are well aware of and not all that happy about. And so, they end up 24th on the board this week. Number 23, moving up 2 spots. The reason that Columbus and Chicago moved down is the New York Islanders. So the Islanders have moved up to 23rd. They have won 7 of their last 11 games. They're 7-3-1 in their last 11. They're trying to chip their way back into the hunt somehow, some way. And yes, they have to have a 700 winning percentage from here in order to have a hope at, or points percentage, I should say, because winning percent is different from points percentage. But they need a 700. And that's kind of an elite number. And I don't know that they're capable of it, but Barry Trotz behind the bench. We'll see if he can work some kind of magic. If the Islanders were to somehow make up that ground and get into a playoff spot, Barry Trotz would be coach of the year in my eyes. I'm just saying that would probably be it. After all of the setbacks they've had and all the, the way COVID went through their team, they were one of the first and worst that went through it, and here they are. They're at least staying afloat. Number 22, same spot as last week, is Edmonton. Now, if Edmonton had lost tonight against Calgary, odds are they're below the Islanders on the overall power rankings. But for Edmonton, again, they win against Calgary. We'll see whether or not this is a sign things are turning around. The good news is their power play worked tonight. They also managed that come from behind victory tonight. There are reasons to be optimistic if you're an Oilers fan based on tonight's result, but it can't be anything more than cautious optimism. The idea that they can do it from back-to-back games, that's where the problem comes in. Number 21, dropping one spot from where they were last week, is Detroit. So Detroit, 21st on the board. At home, they're very good. On the road, it's a mediocre record. Against Nashville tonight, it's another example of that they're not very good on the road, and that holds them back. So they stay at 500. They win one, they lose one, they win one, they lose one, and here we are. They're at 500, and so they end up 21st on the board. So for Detroit, again, the chasm now between them and Boston for that last playoff spot just keeps getting wider. And we'll see whether or not Detroit can maybe get hot in the second half, but I'm not sure on that one. Number 20, dropping 2 spots from last week, San Jose. The Sharks, it depends on the night. It really does, but they're not racking up the wins. The good news for them is that nobody in the Pacific is. The Pacific Division, it looked like LA was, but then LA had some tough games this week. So for San Jose, they're not falling out of the race because they're still right now sitting at the number 2 wildcard spot. But that 7-1 loss against Tampa tonight, that's a tough one. And I understand it's Tampa. I understand they were angry, but still, San Jose, they've got a big road trip coming up. We'll see how that road trip goes for them. Number 19, moving up 2 spots from last week, the Vancouver Canucks. Impressive game against Florida last night, considering that there were so many players that were out. When I start hearing Bailey, Dries, and a save by Martin, I'm like, okay, so this is basically the Abbotsford Canucks out there. So there was a lot of that last night, and I thought they performed well. They get a point in that situation, and they did well at the end of that road trip. The end of that road trip went well for them. I was impressed. So, yeah, for Vancouver, the week could have been a lot worse. They're still in the hunt for a playoff spot. They are at 500, and this is the difference between the West and the East. A 500 record in the West means you're still in the hunt. A 500 record in the East means you're probably looking at a lottery pick. It's basically the season's over. Number 18, dropping 2 spots from where they were last week, is Dallas. It's weird, but Dallas they get a couple of wins this week. I wasn't that impressed with them in the wins. There's some really sloppy play by Dallas going on. We'll see whether or not they can get themselves into a playoff spot. Again, in the West, it's possible, right? Points percentage-wise, they're definitely in the hunt. So for Dallas, they're currently 18th on the board. We'll see if that changes next week. I know last week I had them at 16th, and I wasn't that happy with them at 16th because I felt like they probably should have been in the third row, but I couldn't justify putting them below anybody that was in the third row last week. So this week it's the third row for them. Number 17, rounding out this row, moving up 2 spots from last week, is Anaheim. Now Anaheim, rough go for them, but their last game, pretty good game. And if they can build on that, who knows? And that's the thing. Anaheim, they were pretty hot at the start of the year. They've been pretty cold over their last 15 games. But they're still in a playoff spot right now. And if they start putting together, I'll say 6 wins in each 10 games, they end up making the playoffs. No problem. So for Anaheim, what we shall see. But notice they're still outside the first 2 rows, right? So now we get into the top 2 rows. Number 16, dropping 1 spot from last week, is Winnipeg. So Winnipeg, rough result tonight against Boston. This afternoon against Boston, right? But in general, I thought they had a decent week. Could have been better. If they'd played as well in the second and third as they did in the first against Boston, they win that game. But again, Boston, once that momentum shifted, that was basically it. So yeah, Winnipeg, top 16, not in the playoffs currently. They are the only team, they're not the only team actually that's in the top 16 that's outside the playoffs, because San Jose and Anaheim are both below the line, because number 15 is also below the playoff line. They move up 2 spots from last week, and that's Calgary. Impressive win against Florida, and then they lose the Battle of Alberta tonight. I didn't bust them down for losing the Battle of Alberta tonight. I thought that was an entertaining game. We'll see whether or not it's a sign that Calgary still has a lot of work to do to fix things, or if it's just it was a Battle of Alberta game. Just enjoy it for what it was, kind of thing, right? And so, yeah, I've kept Calgary at 15. If you look at points percentage, they still should be a playoff team. They're still putting up points at a high enough rate. It's really a matter of them having a lot of games in hand on the other teams. They just have to win them, which could be a challenge. Some teams don't win those games in hand and end up not ending up in a playoff spot. Number 14, dropping 1 spot from last week, the LA Kings. So for the Kings, it was some good games, bad games for them. And overall, though, I still like where they're at. I still think that for the Kings, I think that they should end up in a playoff spot. Between Anaheim and LA, I think LA's in a better spot to maintain a playoff spot. And then either Calgary or Edmonton probably get the other spot in the Pacific. And then we'll see if one of the other Pacific teams ends up getting a wild card spot. But I still think LA's playing well. They played well against Colorado the other night. Colorado's they're an absolute wagon right now, so I didn't penalize them for that. Number 13, switching spots with LA from last week, Washington. Important that the Caps won in overtime tonight, just because that's been a problem. So if they can start putting up some wins in overtime, if they can show that they can win these close games and whatnot, I think that's important. And for the Capitals, they're the one team in the East that looks kind of vulnerable. If one of these other teams in the East starts rolling, Washington does look like the team that might fall out of a playoff spot if any of the top 8 were going to. But again, there's still plenty of time to turn around. Points percentage-wise, they're fine. Just when you look at the absolute wins, they're not as fine as one might assume when you look at the points percentage. But again, nice comeback victory tonight over Ottawa. Ovechkin with a couple of goals. If he starts heating up, especially if Backstrom's heating up too, that could turn Capitals around. Number 12, dropping 3 spots from last week, is Vegas. Now, Vegas did get that overtime win against Montreal. But Vegas needed an overtime win against Montreal. Vegas has been struggling, and I'm not that enamored with the way that the goaltending's been going, or the fact that they have to keep coming back, the fact they keep falling behind. And so for Vegas, again, are they the best team in the Pacific? Yes. Are they also dealing with a lot of injuries? That's also a yes. When those guys come back, when you get Eichel in the lineup, you got Pacioretty and Stone's 100%. Yeah, no, Vegas should be much better. But for right now, I have them at 12th. Number 11, same spot as last week, Boston. So this is me looking at a team and saying, yeah, 11th is about right. I don't see Boston as a world beater right now. That being said, they've won 9 of their last 11 games. The game that they got absolutely destroyed by Carolina, I thought that spoke more to the strength of Carolina than a weakness for Boston. And just once it started going the wrong way, it was done. So Boston did bounce back from that. And so the fact they've got 9 wins in their last 11, that's 11 games. So they're 11th. Sure, that's as good a reason as any. Number 10, moving up 2 spots from last week. They're in the top 10, and that's Nashville. The debate about where Nashville belongs on the board has been going on for quite some time, but they have moved up. They have moved up a lot from where they were at their lowest point, which I think was 23rd overall, and now they're in the top 10. I've been impressed at points with their game. There are still some concerns I have with Nashville, but one thing that I think has been good is Nashville's been winning some games when Saros isn't at his best. So when Saros isn't necessarily having one of those world-beating nights and they win the game anyways, I think that speaks to them getting better as a team, and thus they end up in the top 10. Number 9, dropping 2 spots from last week, which is more a reflection of the teams that passed them than a reflection of them, is Toronto. Now tonight, against the New York Islanders, Toronto had a complete game. They really did. And Mrazek played really well, and things looked good. But Toronto's been having a hard time getting those full 60 minutes. Each game's been an adventure, which for me, as somebody who doesn't cheer for or against the Leafs, it's entertaining to watch. But I can imagine for Leafs fans, it drives them crazy. So for Toronto, I've dropped them out of the top 8. I don't expect them to stay outside the top 8. It's like when I dropped Carolina outside the top 8 that 1 week. I don't expect Toronto to stay outside the top 8. It's just, it's tough. It's an elite group that's in the top 8. So number 8, moving up 2 spots from last week, the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers, on the strength of Carolina losing in New Jersey last night, now they're back in a tie for first place in that division. They've played 4 more games. I still think Carolina's the better team. That's the reason Carolina hasn't shown up on the board yet. But the Rangers are hanging in there. And Rangers, much like Nashville, we're starting to see games where maybe Shesterkin has a rough night to start and they bail him out. And so that's the kind of thing that I like to see, because in the playoffs, that can be a difference maker too. That team that gets to the playoffs because their goaltender's standing on his head, in the playoffs, teams will normally, they don't really figure out a goalie, but they might figure out, okay, well, we can get 2 goals a game here, and then we can limit their attack. And those teams can end up being out of the playoffs early. So if a goalie drags a team into the playoffs, they can get shut down in the playoffs. The Rangers are starting to really look like they're going to win games by 7-3, 8-4 scores if they have to. And that's pretty impressive. I think the Rangers are starting to play better as a team. Number 7, moving up 1 spot from last week, Minnesota. A couple of wins over Chicago. Overall, some pretty solid play from Minnesota recently. The record over their last 11 is 5-4-2, which is not fantastic. But that's why they're not number 1 as they were, 3 weeks ago? Is it 3 weeks ago or is it 4 weeks ago now? It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 5 weeks ago they were number 1. So, yeah. For Minnesota, they move up 1 spot from where they were last week. Again, I think they're playing well. Kaprizov's fantastic. Kakanen's been pretty good, filling in for Talbot. Talbot's not far away either, so Talbot gets back. we'll see if Minnesota keeps winning like this. But Kakkonen on back-to-back nights will win both nights. Number 6, dropping 3 spots from where they were last week, Florida. It's the road. It's the road record. It's not fantastic. They are a different team away from home than they are at home. They can score at will at home. They can score 9, 10 goals. And then on the road, it's not there. And so I'm not trying to take anything away from what Spencer Martin did last night, but Florida didn't figure that out, and they didn't get that win in regulation or even in overtime. So, for Florida, their road record is kind of holding them back for me a little bit, and we'll see as the trip continues and as their schedule evens out, where they've played as many road games as home games, which is going to happen soon enough. We'll see what their records look like and everything. But it's the one thing for Florida that does kind of make me back off a little bit with them. Because once you get into number 5, that's Tampa. Tampa, one setback on the road trip as well. But I think Tampa right now is just like tonight's 7-1 win against San Jose. That's fantastic. The Lightning they're the defending Stanley Cup champions, 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions, and they're going to be in the driver's seat going into the playoffs. Do they win the cup again? Who knows? But the fact that they're still in the hunt for a 3rd straight Stanley Cup is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. So for Tampa Bay, pretty good week for them overall. They did have the one setback, right? And then other than that, I think they played pretty well. So they just move up the 1 spot. Number 4, also moving up 1 spot from last week, St. Louis. As I said, the board now, I feel pretty confident in where teams are on the board. So there's going to be some minor changes like Philly dropping and Florida dropping a few spots. But other than that, things stay pretty much the same. St. Louis, very impressive, playing quite well week in and week out. They just keep winning games. They're not always relying on the comeback win either. The comeback wins, as exciting as they are, it does make me a bit nervous with this because that's not really sustainable over a full season. But yeah, St. Louis playing really well. They went in and they spanked Seattle last night. Number 3, Pittsburgh. So it's weird, Pittsburgh last week, there were some comments I saw about why does Shannon have Pittsburgh so high up? Well, they're 25-10-5 now, so they're on pace for over 50 wins this year. They're playing really well, and that's after they had kind of a slow start to the season. They've been an absolute wagon, and now that they got Malkin back, Malkin's putting up a lot of points. Jari's looking fantastic. Yes, DeSmith's numbers have not been great. That is one point of concern. I would think they addressed that at the deadline. But yeah, Pittsburgh looks great. And that's Sid the Kid, hat trick. Pretty good week for him. And so for Pittsburgh, yeah, this is really looking like a team that could do some damage. And then the question mark becomes, so do they win a round in the playoffs for the first time since 2018? That's really where the rubber meets the road, right? But for now, they're number 3 on the board. Number 2 on the board, same spot as last week as Carolina. Briefly this week, Carolina was first. Carolina, very good week, rolling along, and then New Jersey beats them, and I said, all right, so Carolina was first. I'll drop them back down to second because there's a team that I feel like right now is just pretty darn near unstoppable to the point where their goal music plays in my head. And some goal songs are fine and some aren't. Carolina's is fun. Vancouver sucks. It is Simple Minds is awful. It is the worst goal song. I think in the history of the National Hockey League. Don't You Forget About Me is not a goal celebration at all. But Carolina, good goal celebration song for them. I've never done a video on my favorites because it doesn't really matter. I don't think anybody cares that much, to be honest. But Carolina, number 2 on the board. Good week. Not fantastic. The loss against New Jersey. But again, part of that I think is all of the emotions went into last night's game against the Rangers. And that's why they're called trap games when the next night you're playing against a team like New Jersey, where maybe you don't get up for it. Maybe you've got a rookie goaltender in there. Maybe things aren't quite the way they should be with your lineup, right? So number 1 on the board, and again with their goal song still going through my head, Colorado. The Colorado Avalanche, number 1 now 2 weeks in a row. And again, they've been towards the top of the board for most of the season. They've been excellent. There was one point where they were 18th because they had a really rough week. and then they just cruised right back up. Colorado, the scoring is there, but there's depth as well. Kadri's having a fantastic season. Their blue line is scoring at an incredible rate. Makar gets a lot of attention, but Taves has been playing so darn well. He's going to get at least some consideration for Norris if he continues like this. Eric Johnson's been very good. They missed him last year in the playoffs. Jack Johnson, the effort's there, and I'm going to say this with Jack Johnson. I think he fits in better in Colorado right now than he has in his last couple of stops. And then Darcy Kemper's numbers are getting better. Kemper is playing better. And that's huge. If Colorado starts getting the goaltending, which I think they have over the last few weeks, yeah, they're going to be really tough to stop, right? And I know people are going to say, well, in the second round, yep, the second round is where we'll find out. But I would think they'll have home ice in the second round and maybe through the whole playoffs. We shall see. But there you go. Power rankings for this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.